So what's up, companions? Alright, so today I'm going to go see Morbius. I haven't seen it yet. I just bought my ticket. I am, as of this moment, I'm literally the only person in the theater. So we'll see how that goes. But, yeah, I mean, obviously I've seen the reviews. I do not have a lot of faith in this movie, if I'm being honest. And that's not just the reviews. I'm not being swayed by other people's opinions. I've never had much faith in this movie, mostly because it's helmed by Sony. But also, there are things that I haven't liked about the run-up to this movie, starting with the fact that it stars Jared Leto. I have no faith in Jared Leto. I have no faith in Jared Leto. I've heard he's good in Dallas Buyers Club. Never seen that movie. Other than that, I've never liked him in anything I've ever seen him in. Honestly, I've never liked him in anything I've ever seen him in. Unless I'm forgetting something. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I don't think so. And when it comes to superhero movies, I can't believe anyone would ever hire him after Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad was so bad. James Gunn's Suicide Squad is a work of art. It's fucking great. It is so good. But yeah, that first one, so bad. So unbelievably bad. And from what I'm hearing, Morbius might be along the same lines. Now, again, if I go in there and it's a good movie, then I'm going to say I think it's a good movie. I feel like Captain Marvel got very similar reviews to this so far as it was getting review bombed by a bunch of people. And I thought Captain Marvel was a good movie. Now, I have noticed that there are people on the internet who are fighting to say that Morbius is a good movie and that these reviews are unfair and blah, blah, blah. I guess that's possible. It certainly is possible. Though the thing I will underline about what I've seen is that the people who are like, Morbius is a great movie, tend to say something very specific afterwards. I'm seeing a lot of people who are like, Morbius is a great movie. It's not shoving PC down my throat like these other movies. And let me just say, if that's where you're coming from, your opinion is so tired. So tired. Like, I'm sorry. Anyone who thinks that comic book material wasn't PC from the start, like, I can pull up the old 50s comics of Superman saying that you should like immigrants. This is how it's been the whole time. This is how it's been the whole time. If you didn't catch on, I'm sorry, you're stupid. But, this is how it's been the whole time. So trying to push that angle, that like, oh, this is the new movie and it's not PC, and the old movies are PC and that's why they're bad. That's a real, it's a warning flag. It's a red flag. It A, makes me distrust your opinion immediately because you have such a bad take. And B, it makes it seem like you are propping this movie up because of your personal, political opinions or whatever you want to say is bad about people liking movies that include women and people of color. So, yeah, anyway, I'm going to go see this movie. I'm approaching it with an open mind. I absolutely would not pay the money to see this movie if I didn't think that there was a speck of possibility that I'll come back and say this movie was all right. That's honestly the best I expect I'll say for this movie. I've seen reviews by a number of people who I've watched other things that they watched, and we tend to have similar opinions so far as, we have our own opinions, but we usually come out around the same place. And people's opinions who I respect, especially other YouTube reviewers, and they've given, very nuanced, specific reviews as to why they have problems with it, especially people who are Morbius fans. I've seen, really interesting, nuanced reviews. So yeah, I'm just hoping that I can come back and give my take on this movie, and it's worth listening to. So I'll see you guys when I get back. Okay, guys. So, right off the bat, let me say the nicest thing I can about this movie. The nicest thing I can say about this movie is that, let's say you were on a plane, like a 13-hour plane ride. Let's say you were flying from Ohio to London, nonstop. You got 13 hours on the plane and, nothing to do. Go ahead, watch Morbius. That's fine. But in any other scenario other than a plane or, let's say, a submarine, a scenario where you're locked inside an compressed compartment that leaving it would kill you, I'm not sure Morbius is worth seeing. And don't spend money on it. I don't know any other way to say it. This movie's not worth spending money on to see. Go see Batman. I hear that's all right. Go see any other movie. Yeah, this, oh, guys, that was, here's the hardest part, is that I can actually see where you could have done something with this movie. If you'd even just recorded a few more scenes, if the script writing had been given to somebody competent, if, there's a million, the audience is primed for this shit. The Marvel side, MCU side is pumping shit out, and people aren't sick of it yet. People can say whatever they want about, oh, people are sick of superhero movies. People aren't sick of superhero movies. People are eating this shit up. They're still going to see all of it. This movie made a ton of money in its opening weekend, despite incredibly bad reviews, because people love these movies so much. But this one was really bad. Off the top of my head, I would have to say this is the worst Marvel-related movie I've ever seen. And I'm talking pre-MCU. I'm talking Spider-Verse included. I'm talking X-Men movies included. This is the worst Marvel movie I've ever seen. Hang on. I just remembered Ghost Rider. I would need to rewatch Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage. Ghost Rider is probably the only Marvel property other than this that even gets close to falling on the scale. And maybe one of the Hulk movies. I don't know. But this one is bad. It is aggressively bad. If I'm comparing it to Ghost Rider, that should really tell you almost everything you need to know, because I've met very few people who are into the Ghost Rider movie. Even with Nick Cage. That's Nick fucking Cage, and in the movie's just garbage. Oh man, where to start? I don't know where to start, guys. Okay, you know what? I do know where to start. Let's just go ahead and, and the spoilers are going to flow free and heavy from this point forward. So I hope you're interested in listening to spoilers if you're still here, because this is, I'm going to just tell you shit. Because, again, you shouldn't pay money to see this movie. The post-credit scenes. Adrian Toomes gets sent to this universe, gets sent to this Spider-Verse. For what reason? Well, because Sony owns him. That's the reason. That's the only reason. There's no plot reason given. There's no device. There's no doohickey. There's no reasoning. He himself says, I think it's got something to do with Spider-Man. Fucking, worst. The shittiest script writing. The worst. Absolute worst script writing. It was so bad. Either this movie was written by an intern or by George Lucas. Those are the options, guys. Intern or George Lucas with absolutely no help from anyone else. That's how bad it is. This movie, script writing is, I hate sand bad. They rip off the Hulk at one point. He's like, you won't like me when I'm hungry. Bad. He says I am Venom at one point. Like, they're so desperate to try and create continuity between their movies at this point in a way that the MCU has, that has created all this, it's helped create all this fandom for the MCU, is having all this continuity between their movies. And Sony's just trying to force it. They're just trying to shoehorn it in. So, like, at one point he's like, I am Venom. You see it in the trailers, right? But the cops who are following him around trying to figure out what's going on, even though they seem to know what's going on, every time they show up at a scene, they're just like, yeah, this is exactly what happened here. And this guy, Michael Morbius, is doing it. The cops literally know everything. They know everything. Like, before they get to the scenes. They also have no point in the movie. The cops have no point in the movie. They literally play no formative role in the movie. Yeah, and... Oh, God, where was I going with that? It's just, yeah, the knowledge people have and don't have is ridiculous. Oh, I was saying, the cops come in at one point and they say, this is like that scene in San Francisco, aka Venom, right? Like, people are all torn up and eaten and shit, so that means that it's like Venom. So these happen to be the cops that are investigating, well, they're FBI agents. At one point they say they're FBI agents, right? And they're like, this is like that scene in San Francisco. So they're the guys who are investigating Venom in San Francisco, is the inference I'm supposed to make from this line. They're the FBI agents, right? But later in the movie, in a different scene, they're killing, some cops get killed, right? In New York City. And the guy's like, oh, you're going to kill cops in my city? That's unforgivable. And it's like, so... Are you FBI agents, or are you New York police, or are you FBI agents assigned to New York? In which case, why were you in San Francisco for the Venom murders? Are you just the cops in the FBI who are assigned to comic book related murders? Like, I don't, it doesn't make sense. And like, comic book movies aren't supposed to make sense. That's one of the things that I always point out when people are like, this doesn't make sense, or this doesn't make sense. There's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief. So, like, I'm not coming at the idea that, like, bat DNA turned this guy into, like, a magical vampire. Like, he's, like, turning into smoke and shit. I don't know what part of your DNA allows you to turn into smoke. I've never seen a bat turn into smoke. But apparently... if you combine human DNA and bat DNA, you can turn into smoke. Fine, whatever. That's a comic book, okay? I don't know. I don't even honestly know if Morbius can do that in the comics. Maybe he can, and I'm complaining about something that Morbius, it's one of his powers. But, like, they do no explaining of it, and since he's, like, this scientific take on his origin story, again, I don't know the Morbius origin story. I didn't even bother to go read his Wikipedia. Before I went to this. I'm familiar with Morbius mostly because I've seen him in a couple of Spider-Man comics, and when I'm shopping for comic books, I see a bunch of Morbius comics. You want to know why? Because a lot of people sell their Morbius comics because he's not super popular to begin with. And if you like Morbius, please, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to shit on your character. He's probably super dope in the comic books. I'm sure he is. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sold so many comic books over the years. But... this movie is just, it's ham-handedly written. The dialogue is wooden. It's boring. It's incredibly boring for a comic book movie. I honestly wanted to leave. I wanted to leave before it was over. I've maybe done that once in my entire life, got up and walked out of a movie. I didn't get up and walk out of this movie, but mostly because I knew I was going to be doing a review, and I knew there were post-credit scenes, and I just wanted to see it all and make sure I didn't miss anything that was really cool at the end that might, make up for how shitty the rest of the movie was. But there's nothing, guys. It's not even like the old X-Men movies. Some of those are pretty bad watching them as an adult. But they have scenes, and characters that are redemptive for the movies. There's some character in that movie who got their character just right. They nailed it, and they make the movie worth watching. Or some scenes worth watching, like where Quicksilver's going super fast. That kind of stuff. Even just stupid stuff like that, where it's like all about somebody's powers. There's stuff in those worth watching. It's really hard to say there's anything in Morbius worth watching. There's like... one moment when his love interest, which we'll get to that. There's one moment when his love interest accidentally cuts her finger, and he has to like fight with himself to control the vampire to keep himself from attacking her. And that should have been the story. That should have been it. I kind of feel like maybe they tried to smash two movies together here. Maybe that's the problem, because it also feels very disjointed. So you start off, the beginning of the movie, he's an adult, and he's about to get his powers, I guess, because there's some experiment that he's conducting in Costa Rica where he's trying to trap bats, right? But they literally just like cut out in the middle of the scene and you never revisit it again. It just exists because they shot that scene, and I guess they couldn't edit anything else out. Like, they must have just needed every last second of footage that they shot to make this movie, because otherwise the editing changes don't make sense. Like, the movie either needed to be longer so that they could include the scenes that needed to be in it, or it needed to be a half an hour. It needed to be a TV show. Like, I don't know where to go with it, guys. Because, yeah. So anyway, I got off track, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting to see Morbius struggling with himself. Instead, he gets these powers. He basically figures them out in 5 minutes. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. He goes, "Oh, I feel all right," and then he does like a triple backflip and hangs upside down, and then he immediately starts turning into smoke and blah blah blah, and he's flying. And can Morbius fly? I don't know if he can fly. I don't know if he can glide. I don't even know what I was watching exactly, because he never mentions it. No one ever brings anything up. No one ever explains anything. I'm trying to think if there were any really cool moments that I really liked. I know there was one in particular that I was like, make this stick in your head because you want to bring this up. Oh, okay, there's the moment, so Morbius has been arrested for a bunch of murders, right? Most of which he has committed, one of which he didn't commit. You don't know that yet. So the guy who frames him for the murder comes in, and the moment of reveal of like, oh, this is who framed him, and this is how he figures out how he framed him, was all right. That was a good moment. It was like the moment that the movie turns up to 90, and that was probably the only salvageable moment in the whole film. Otherwise, gosh, it was bad. The love interest was stupid. It was stupid. Beyond the obvious fridging, because, yeah, she dies, and he's the one who kills her. Ooh, yeah, he has to because the other guy arguably kills her, and she's about to die, so he consumes her blood for the strength right before the final fight, right? It's supposed to be very touching, but even if that moment was done right, by that point in the film, I'd wanted to leave for 20 or 25 minutes already. So like I was well checked out. The movie jumps around in time at first. So yeah, it starts in the present and then it jumps to the past and shows you where these two kids met for 4 hours. And then one of them gets sent off to school where he like spends the rest of his life. And then the other one becomes like a multimillionaire, despite the fact that he's got an ever increasingly painful, crippling, supposed to be fatal disease. Everyone else you see who has the disease is a child who's dying. But these two guys live into their 30s for no reason. One of them is working on the cure. The other one becomes insanely wealthy. They never explain how. So let's get into his Milo, the secondary character now. So he's got his best buddy Milo, which is a name he gave him as like a cruel joke as a child. Like, he's like, oh yeah, like 7 kids ago, the kid that sat in your bed was named Milo. So I just call all the kids who come here Milo, because they all just die. So why learn their names? Like, really fucked up, like, dark joke for a child to be telling. But the child, calls the other child Milo and gets to like him and whatever anyway. And then continues calling him Milo. Refuses to call the other kid by his real name. Also, apparently all children with this disease are orphans. In the whole movie, you see a handful of kids that have this disease. Not one of them has parents. No one ever mentions their parents. Michael doesn't mention his parents. Milo doesn't mention his parents. Apparently, whenever children are diagnosed with this disease, they're immediately abandoned by their by their parents and they're raised by doctors. So the doctor who raises these kids, once Milo gets the cure that makes him a vampire too, he just immediately turns into a complete psychopathic murderer. With no explanation. There's no explanation. He's like apparently a pretty nice guy before that. You don't see a lot of him because, again, the character development in this movie is non-existent. You see a little bit of him as a kid, and it's like establishing that him and Michael are close as children. You see one moment of violence when some other kids are picking on him and he swings a cane at one of them, as a little child. And then you see him as an adult, and he's like fabulously wealthy. Again, they make absolutely they don't tell you at all how he made all this wealth. There's like maybe the slightest hint that like he's some kind of criminal, and maybe that he came by his wealth in a way that isn't legit, because he's got like armed guards hanging out around his place, and Michael's like, oh, why do you have armed guards around? And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. I won a card game with a Russian who's mad about it. And it's like, okay, that doesn't seem legit. If they'd taken like 10 seconds to like just establish like, yeah, this guy made a bunch of money as a criminal, and sure, he was sick and unhealthy, but he had other people do like really effed up things in his name or whatever, just like it wouldn't have even been a full scene. They could have taken out, there was like a 4-minute scene where it's just the secondary vampire, Milo, like dancing around in a suit, looking at himself in the mirror like, look at me. Now I have fangs. Now I don't. Now I have fangs again. It went on for an eternity. I'm sure it was only like 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity sitting there in the theater. They could have replaced that scene with a 2-minute scene where like they're talking about the money at the beginning, which is used to fund this doctor's research. And he's like, I know you didn't get this money legitimately. That's all. One line. If Michael had at one point in the movie been like, I know your money source isn't legitimate, and the other guy could just wave it off, that would have been all we needed to know this guy has a criminal background, which then could have at least slightly explained why the power rushes to his head immediately and he immediately starts hurting all these people. Because he goes from being like a fairly nice guy who's in chronic pain to being a serial murderer, like literally like that. It's just too much. And it makes him ridiculous as a villain. And that's what makes the Marvel movies so good. None of their villains are ridiculous. You genuinely identify with the villains to a degree. You're never supposed to fully identify with the villains, but there are villains. Everybody's got their favorite villain in Marvel because all the villains have those parts of themselves that are genuine, And this villain's just like, I'm a psychopathic murderer with vampire powers. They have their first fight in a subway, and there's literally like people just walking around, like just they're bouncing off the walls and shit, and the people around them in the subway aren't running away. They're just like, oh, look at this. It's painful. It feels like they shot everything in one shot and then just gave up. Ah, man. Yeah, and they fridged the love interest is unnecessary. I guess it's in like every one of these movies. Well, not every one of them, but a lot of them have this, the superhero's got to have his love interest. But it was so bad. You don't build up any affection for this woman. At one point, he sends her, he's like, I need you to go back to my lab and get some stuff for me, implying he can't go there. But then 2 scenes later, they're in his lab, her and him together. It's like, why didn't you? And, she almost dies the first time she goes to the lab, too. That's the other thing, because he's not with her. And he's got this, like, big tank full of vampire bats, which are, like, piranhas that live in the air in this universe, that he just keeps off to the side. Again, no purpose to these bats in the movie. There's no purpose. Nominally, they're where he originally got his genetic material from, but Why does he need to keep 1,000 of them in a tube in his lab? I don't know. Then at the end of the movie, he just like touches some water, and that allows him to summon like 3 billion bats from around the city, which come then and follow his commands. Again, this could be one of Morbius's powers, but there's no explanation. There's no storytelling. And yeah, the ending is very anticlimactic. They have like kind of an okay fight scene at one point, sort of towards the middle. The final fight is bad though. Final fight is like they're going through walls and shit, but it's all done in a way that you just can't see what's happening. It's like Blair Witch Project stuff. They did that so that they didn't have to animate it, guys, which is also my opinion to the smoke. Unless, correct me if Morbius turns into smoke in the comics, but I think that they make them look like smoke as they were jumping around and stuff, because that makes it easier to animate without it looking fake. So they're trying to avoid the uncanny valley, which is what I think they did in the Harry Potter movies. So when people in the Harry Potter movies are dueling, especially the later movies, they're like flying around, turn into smoke, and that is not in the books at all. There's none of that in the books. But I'm guessing that they tried to do those scenes the first time with people just jumping from spot to spot, and it's something about it didn't look right. It didn't look right when you watched it, so they added all that smoke to conceal things, to confuse the human brain and make it less unrealistic looking because you can't see what's happening. I feel the same way with Morbius. I feel like everything's all smoky and stuff just because they didn't want to take the time to animate it as well as Marvel animates. Trying to think if there's any other specific things I want to bring up. It's a real shame. It really is. I think that there's a lot that could have been done with this title. You know? Oh, the one last thing I want to talk about. I hate how they advertised for this. How they went out of their way to make it feel like it's part of the MCU when everybody knows Sony isn't the MCU, except everybody doesn't know that. So there's a lot of you out there thinking this is the newest MCU movie. I'm seeing people saying the MCU is dying because people don't like it anymore because the bad Morbius reviews. Morbius is not the MCU. Morbius is not the MCU. It's the Sonyverse. All right? Sony is doing this. I feel the same way about Venom and Venom Let There Be Carnage. They're just not good, guys. They're not good. Venom was okay. It was okay at best. I think Sony's really missing their opportunity with these characters so far as they're trying to just capitalize. They're just trying to steal some of Marvel's money, essentially, or the Disney's money, I guess, now. They're trying to steal the audience and steal money off of that wave rather than trying to do their own thing. And especially because they're getting into these really dark characters. They own the rights to these really dark, they would be MCU characters, but Spider-Man characters. And they're like trying to make dark movies that you can still take your kids to. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Make the movies rated R, right? And just go for it. There was no blood in this movie. That was supposed to be the first thing I said. That was the first thing I meant to say. I just went and watched a vampire movie with no blood. There's no blood. There's like a part where he's got a little blood under his mouth. And, you know, at one point it looks like somebody's got some ketchup on their neck. One guy gets like straight disemboweled, right? Straight disemboweled. And Morbius comes and finds him as he's dying. And he's got like a quarter of a can of Coke spilled on his shirt, basically. Just ridiculous. They went really far out of their way to not lean into the horror side of Morbius. And that's a shame. There were a few moments when he transformed into Morbius, and I was like, damn, that's just right. That looks just like the comic books. So this is not an impossible task. They just didn't do it right. They just did it very poorly from script writing on up. And it's a shame because, yeah, I do like some of the actors that were in this film. Most especially, I was really surprised to see Al Madrigal in this film. I think he's hilarious. And they obviously stuck him in the film as an attempt at comic relief. but his lines just fell so flat. There was not a single laugh in my audience in the entire movie. Now, to be fair, there were only 3 of us there. But neither me nor the 2 other fellows in the theater laughed a single time in the entire run of the movie. Nor did we cheer, nor did we clap. I know those don't feel like normal things to do, but those are normal things to do at a Marvel movie. I think I've roundly beaten this movie, guys. Whew, boy. Like I said, if you're on a plane for 17 hours and you've already watched the 2 or 3 movies that are better than that you wanted to watch on the app, I guess watch Morbius. It won't kill you to watch Morbius, but boy, it felt like a punishment being in a theater that I was capable of walking out of. It really did.